Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl. And our previous video, we looked at Warhammer The Old World's top 3 easiest factions to play, based upon their rule set, based upon average games, particularly leaning towards more inexperienced players. Now we're going to take a look at what I think are the top 3 hardest factions to play. Now, please bear in mind that I have not included in my consideration Ogre Kingdoms and Chaos Dwarfs, as I have 0 experience with those factions, and I only have one game against Ogre Kingdoms, so I don't consider there enough experience to really make a consideration on that. So it's everything with the exception of those 2 factions. So let's take a look and see what I think the hardest factions to play are. First off, the Wood Elf realms, and this isn't in any particular order, this is just the ones I consider the 3 hardest. So the Wood Elves then, there's no doubt the Wood Elves are a high tier army, but they're very much a glass cannon. They can certainly put out high damage. You need to get some very specific synergies in there, and they don't really take that hit back. You know, there's a plethora of expensive units, which means there's generally a lack of bodies on the table combined with low durability. Normally, if you don't have the durability, your units are cheaper. You can field large units and you absorb the damage through casualties, right? Just because you've just got more troops. But that's quite tough with the Wood Elves. They just don't really have the number of bodies to be able to deal with taking that many casualties, and it can really hurt their damage output. That as you get into the mid to late game, you just can't do enough damage. That lack of durability then means really careful movement. That comes with experience, as well as experience of the full enemy capability. So if you don't have durability and you don't have the bodies to soak it up, you need to be really, really careful in how you play, that movement, the ranges, how far you are away from the enemy, ensuring you don't get charged unless you're baiting somebody. So that, for me, means you really need a lot of experience to play this army well. Just putting a list together of Wood Elves and throwing it on the tabletop, I think in a lot of cases with an inexperienced player is going to end up with a pretty bad result. You know, and synergies, they are key, especially as you get to the higher levels of play, and getting the right units working together to maximize that damage output takes a lot of practice experience. It takes experience of knowing how the rules interact. It takes experience of actually playing the army on the tabletop, seeing how it works together, because reading in a book is one thing, playing on the tabletop's another, and rolling dice, and you need to do that over multiple games just to see how things fit together. So Wood Elves, for me, definitely one of the hardest armies to play currently in the Old World, with just a pick up and play, relatively inexperienced player playing against another average player. Next up, the Empire of Man, and I think this kind of held up when I looked at a video that I did about the what factions I thought were top tier, right? And I put Empire of Man really low down, but there were quite a few people in the comments also saying, no, this army's great. And I think this is a classic case of the Empire of Man. If you've got a really experienced player, you can do some cool things with it. But for just an average player or an inexperienced player picking up this army, I think they're going to really struggle. You know, there's a huge variety of units that have got incredibly different roles. You've got the regimental and detachment system, and that in most cases, the unit on its own is not particularly hard-hitting, it's not particularly elite or durable in the same way that you might have something like Warriors of Chaos, right? And due to that wide variety of units, new players often want to take a bit of everything, right? I want some handgunners, and I want some infantry, and I want a bit of cavalry, maybe some pistoliers, I want a couple of artillery machines, and you end up with this huge variety of units that just get put down on the tabletop, and they don't really have any clear purpose. They don't really have any clear purpose how they're going to work together, how they're going to interact, what that strategy means, and so that can make it quite chaotic to play in that regard, because you're not moving forward with a very specific plan. It's just you see the army, you go, I need some ranged, I need some melee, I need some cavalry because I need it, and so it doesn't kind of fit together that well. You end up with a battle that gets chaotic, and before you know it, turn 3 or 4, you've lost half your units, and it's all starting to go Pete Tong. There's a lot of character choices as well. You know, you got your priest, your witch hunter, your engineer. You know, you got all your mages, your lords, and so on. And that means deciding which ones to choose can be tough because you're not going to take all of them. There's the points limits, and it just doesn't really make sense to do so. So choosing which ones you're going to take for your particular army list, and again, it's that synergy piece. Again, takes experience of actual gameplay. You know, you're only going to get that through playing with the army many times. And I think that's why you've got people saying, oh, no, Empire, actually, it's not bottom tier or whatever. It's actually a really, really good army. Yeah, but how many times have you played with that army? How's your experience with that army? How's your experience with the game in general? Are you a tournament player, whatever? Whereas I think, you know, Empire of Man, say for your average player, that's going to be really tough to get those synergies and make it work. You know, many new players, when they choose Empire, they're going to default to choosing lots of artillery. You're going to look at Empire, you're going to see rocket batteries, steam tanks, you know, Hellblaster, volley guns, cannons, and all this sort of thing. And that all looks really cool. Ooh, like I can build a really cool gun line. But due to their randomness, they can be really fickle. So you need to know which are the right targets to choose. How much artillery do you take? How do you support it? Make sure the odds are stacked in your favor as much as possible. And again, that requires quite a bit of experience to play. So Empire of Man, for me, I think is definitely an army that could be a bit of a gotcha. You know, it looks cool. There's a lot of recognizable stuff in there from that sort of, you know, right back from the end of the medieval to the Renaissance periods, right? Stuff in there. But I think it's one that can really catch you out in being actually not that easy to play. And finally then is the Skaven. Again, another army that I put down in a very low tier in terms of where they sit with the other factions. But at the same time, I also think this army is incredibly difficult to play. They've got a sizable roster, they've got many varied units, but at the same time, there's huge restrictions on how you build that army because you have to have taken a Warlock Engineer to get Giselles and all this sort of thing. So a lot of restrictions on you have to take a certain thing to get access to other things. That makes it very restrictive. Then you end up going, oh, I want to take one of each of these characters so I get access to all this stuff, but then that becomes not very efficient. So I think with a wide roster that's hugely restricted on the army building means it takes quite a lot of experience to build a list that is reasonably efficient on the tabletop. And I think that, again, you could end up with this chaotic list that just doesn't work together. They also have incredibly low leadership across the board. They got low durability. You know, normally that means that you get your large units, but with that low leadership and low durability, it means that the army can be difficult to manage. You've got these big units, and you know the full understanding of the rules and synergies only comes with experience. How do you make sure that low leadership doesn't cause you too many problems? How do you make sure that low durability doesn't mean a unit just gets exposed and destroyed instantly? You know, one of the main mitigations for that would be, as we said before, cheap units, make them big, casualties absorb the damage, there's your durability, right? But large units, as we said before in the previous video, they're unwieldy in movement. If you've got, you know, really wide, really deep units, when you're actually trying to wheel, when you're trying to get your charges in, you can end up getting your charge in and then you just blocked another unit. And, you know, and if you've got units which tend to be low durability, low leadership, often they're going to need support. So you probably want more than one unit charging the same target. And with a big unit, that could be difficult. You could end up blocking yourself, particularly, again, if you're not having that experience, or you move and you end up blocking line of sight so you can't shoot and so on. So that can be a really big problem. And of course, Skaven do have quite a few units which can, of course, shoot. You know, and then you've got all of the above, combined with it being a legacy army, meaning many of the models can be harder to source, especially if you're playing what you see is what you got, which For everything outside of a tournament, I don't recommend. Have fun with the game, play the units, and so on. But that can be challenging for a new player. They might not have the selection of units, and with those amount of restrictions on the army building, I think makes this an incredibly challenging army for a new player or an inexperienced player just to dip in, build a list, put it on the tabletop, and then have a good performance. And I say this is compared against all the other factions there. So for me, the top 3 hardest factions in the old world to pick up and play: Wood Elves, Empire, and Skaven. Again, another short video, but I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. But if you do give it a thumbs down, please let me know why in the comments down below. And as always, if you want to see more content, please hit that subscribe button. It is totally free for you to do, but it's a massive, massive deal for me, so thank you for that in advance. You've been watching The Ghost Hour. Tune back in. We've got a couple more videos we're going to look at before we get to our High Elf faction focus.